Police arrested a woman on what seemed like an ordinary morning. No resistance, no shouting. She simply stood there silent as they placed the cuffs on her wrists and led her away in front of dozens of onlookers. They said she was causing a disturbance. They claimed it was routine, but no one truly knew what was unfolding. 3 hours later, she stood in court, calm, expression unreadable, no lawyer by her side, no tears in her eyes. Everyone assumed it would be a swift hearing until she did the unthinkable. One action, one sentence, one document laid before the judge, and in that instant, the entire courtroom froze. Even the judge stopped breathing. A few people rose from their seats. Phones were quietly pulled out. So who was this woman, and what did she do that turned a quiet courtroom into a storm waiting to break? Because this wasn't just the arrest of an innocent woman. It was the unveiling of truth, the reclaiming of dignity, and the rise of a voice no one would ever overlook again. It all began with a single look. Congresswoman Naomi Walker didn't have the luxury of slowing down, not that day. For 3 straight weeks, she had been running on fumes, juggling committee meetings in Sacramento, a policy roundtable in San Antonio, and a last-minute town hall in Tulsa. Her carry-on suitcase had barely been unpacked between stops. But today wasn't about politics. Today was personal. She arrived at Dallas Love Field just past 6:30 in the morning. Her cousin Marcus had passed away. He was only 42, liver failure. Naomi had grown up with him like a brother. Skipping the funeral wasn't an option, no matter how little sleep she'd gotten or how worn her body felt. Wearing a simple black dress under her blazer, Naomi moved with quiet urgency through the terminal. She clutched a coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, scanning emails from her assistant as she made her way to the Southwest check-in desk. Her flight to Jackson, Mississippi, was scheduled to begin boarding at 7:10 a.m. What she didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the next 90 minutes would strip the day of its purpose. That instead of honoring a life lost, she would have to defend her dignity. What was supposed to be a solemn journey of remembrance was about to become a public confrontation with judgment, prejudice, and the fragile line between authority and abuse. And it would all begin with a look. The first sign of trouble wasn't anything said. It was a look. Not the kind that lasts just a flicker. The young man behind the check-in counter glanced up from his screen, then quickly back down, a faint smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. Naomi Walker knew that look. She had seen it more times than she cared to count. It was the look that always came before the dismissal, the one that said, "You don't belong here," before a word was even exchanged. She stepped forward with calm professionalism. "I'm on flight 2376 to Jackson. I'd like to check my carry-on," she said, offering both her boarding confirmation and government-issued ID. The agent tapped at his keyboard, then frowned. You're not in the system." Naomi didn't react. She knew how these things worked. Glitches happened. But something about his tone didn't sound like an error. It sounded like a game. "That can't be right," she replied, still steady. "I checked in about an hour ago." She handed him her phone. "My boarding pass is right here." He looked at the screen briefly, then back at her. Expression unreadable. "Well, there's been a change," he said. "Your seat's been reassigned. You'll have to wait." Reassigned to what Naomi asked, trying not to sound impatient. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back and waved toward someone behind him. "Hey, can you come take a look at this?" Naomi glanced at the airport clock. 6:43. Her heart tapped a little faster, but her voice remained composed. Can you just tell me what the issue is? I have a funeral to attend. A second employee arrived, barely sparing her a glance. She's flagged for random review, the woman said flatly. We're going to need to recheck her credentials. Naomi blinked. Excuse me, it's routine? The woman replied. No, it's not, Naomi said, her tone sharpening just slightly. I've taken this exact route 4 times this year. This has never happened. The first agent stood up. Ma'am, if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Naomi raised her eyebrows. Calm down, I'm asking a question. That's enough. The woman snapped. Please, stand over there. The air shifted. Passengers in line began to notice. Some raised their phones. A few whispered. That's Congresswoman Walker, someone said under their breath. But that didn't seem to matter here. Not at this gate. Not to these people. Naomi moved to the side, jaw clenched. She pulled out her federal ID and held it out clearly. I'm not hiding anything. I'm on official travel. They barely looked at the badge. The second employee said coolly, ID doesn't override protocol. And that's when Naomi felt it, a cold drop in her stomach. This wasn't about procedure. This wasn't random. This was personal. Despite everything, Naomi Walker kept her composure. Her voice remained calm. I'll cooperate with whatever is required, she said. But I'd like to speak to a supervisor. That's when the first agent turned and waved toward someone behind the scenes. Security, please. Security. Naomi hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't refused any request. She hadn't broken a single rule. And now, she was being treated like a threat. She moved quietly to the end of the counter, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on a faint stain in the carpet. This wasn't a time for reaction. It was a moment that required stillness, not weakness, not surrender. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Behind her, she could feel the stares of passengers. Some were whispering. Others were recording discreetly, behind raised phones. One woman caught her eye and mouthed, I'm sorry. Naomi gave her a soft nod in return. She appreciated the sentiment, but sympathy wasn't going to fix this. 2 TSA officers appeared. Their pace wasn't urgent, but it wasn't casual either. That slow, suspicious walk that always came when a decision had already been made behind closed doors. Ma'am, we need you to come with us, one of them said. For what Naomi asked, her voice was clear, measured. She didn't move. Random review. Please don't make this more difficult than it has to be. She held out her boarding pass and her government ID again slowly, intentionally. I've already checked in, she said. This is an official government trip. That's a real badge. There's no issue here except the one you're creating. The officer didn't even glance at the ID. Didn't ask a single follow-up question. Ma'am, please, he said again. We're not asking. There it was. The quiet threat, dressed in polite language, coded in false civility. Naomi glanced at the gate screen. Flight 2376 was still on time. Boarding had just begun. She thought about her mother already waiting in Jackson, texting her which pew to sit in. She thought about Lena, Marcus's little girl, who had asked if Auntie Naomi would say something at the service. Naomi closed her eyes for a breath, and then she walked. The officers led her away from the gate, past the crowd, through a side door near the end of the terminal. The hallway they entered was sterile, dim, and humming with fluorescent light. A third agent met them halfway, whispered something she couldn't hear. The officers nodded. Then one turned to her. "We'll need to do a full pat-down," he said. "Your bag will also be screened." Naomi's voice was quiet. "Controlled? No warrant? No probable cause? No explanation? You're walking a line you're not trained to cross." One of the officers responded flatly. "You can file a complaint later." She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply stood with her arms out as they patted her down methodically, coldly, with no hint of respect. Her bag was unzipped. Her toiletries were pulled out. Her documents were shuffled through with careless hands. No one explained anything. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, Naomi broke the silence. "Can someone please explain the reassignment, why I was pulled?" One of the officers finally looked up. "Ma'am, I don't handle seating. That's airline. We were called because you were being difficult." "Difficult?" she repeated, her voice cracking for the first time. "I asked a question. I didn't yell. I didn't resist. I complied with everything." He shrugged. "We respond to what we're told. That's our job." Naomi glanced at her watch. 7:16 a.m. Her flight was gone. The gate had closed. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she lowered herself into a cold metal chair along the wall. Her hands rested on her knees. Her eyes stared straight ahead. She wasn't just missing a flight now. She was missing a funeral. She was missing a promise. And she was being punished visibly, publicly, for doing absolutely nothing wrong. One of the TSA officers stepped outside to make a call. The other leaned against the wall, arms crossed, avoiding Naomi's eyes. She pulled out her phone. Her hands were steady, her breath even. But inside, a slow, rising burn had taken hold. She typed one message. "I was pulled. I missed the flight. I need you here." She pressed send and waited. The man who would walk through those doors next wasn't there to argue. He wouldn't ask questions the way Naomi had. He wouldn't need to. Elijah Moore had spent 3 decades on the federal bench. He had seen power misused, and he had seen silence weaponized. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence spoke for him. When his wife sent just 3 words, "I need you," he didn't hesitate. He was already in the car, not far from the terminal. Earlier, Naomi had told him not to come inside. "It's just a short flight," she'd said. "No big deal." But now she needed him. And that meant now, inside the terminal. Naomi sat alone. The TSA officers had stepped a few feet away. They whispered among themselves, but occasionally cast glances in her direction. Her bag was half-zipped. Her papers, her government documents had been scattered and shoved back in without care. She had repacked them herself, slowly, under their gaze. Her blazer was wrinkled. The hair she'd carefully pinned that morning had loosened into soft curls. She still looked composed, but a quiet fire was burning just beneath the surface. The same airline agent who had flagged her earlier now stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes on the floor, as if waiting for this part to be over. The one who called security nowhere to be seen. At 7:36 a.m., the automatic doors at the terminal entrance slid open. Elijah Moore stepped through. He wore a dark gray overcoat, black slacks, and a maroon scarf Naomi had given him for Christmas. His walk was measured, his gaze sharp. When Naomi saw him, she stood. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Elijah's eyes scanned the hallway, the officers, the mess on the table. The agents pretending not to look and finally rested on his wife. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded once. Then he turned to the nearest TSA officer. "Who's in charge here?" The man hesitated. "Sir, may I ask who you are? I'm Elijah Moore, retired federal judge, Ninth Circuit. Who is in charge?" The officer blinked, stunned. One moment." Elijah turned back to Naomi. "What happened? I asked about a seat reassignment," she said evenly. "They said I was being disruptive. I showed them my ID. They ignored it. Then I missed my flight." "Did you raise your voice?" "No." "Did you make a scene?" "No." The officer returned, now with a supervisor in tow. Lanyard, walkie-talkie, clipboard. The supervisor offered his hand. "Judge Moore, we were unaware Elijah didn't take the hand. Why was my wife's seat reassigned? I'd have to check with the gate." "Then check." The supervisor nodded quickly and walked off. Elijah turned his attention to the young airline agent, the same one who had smirked earlier. The one who had waved over his colleague like Naomi was a problem to be solved. "What was your reason for calling security?" She wouldn't stand down. She questioned her seat change. "Yes." But did she shout, "No"? Did she threaten anyone? "No." Elijah leaned in just slightly. "You do realize what you did qualifies as targeted escalation, don't you? You called security without cause. You ignored federal identification. You detained a sitting Congresswoman without probable suspicion." The agent swallowed hard. "I didn't know who she was." Elijah didn't blink. It shouldn't matter. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was thick, tense, undeniable. Down the hall, a passenger who had witnessed it all raised their phone again, catching this moment, too. Another agent arrived, one who hadn't been involved earlier. He caught sight of Elijah's badge, Naomi's posture, and the tension in the air. He whispered something to the supervisor. And just like that, the apologies began. "Ma'am, we deeply regret that," the supervisor began, voice stiff with rehearsed sympathy. But Elijah Moore cut him off. "She doesn't need an apology," he said, voice calm and sharp. "She needed dignity. 20 minutes ago." The supervisor faltered. "We'd like to offer rebooking a first-class seat on the next flight." Naomi Walker shook her head gently. "He's not trying to get me a better seat," she said, voice low but unwavering. "He's trying to get you to realize you don't get to treat people like that. Not me. Not anyone." But the moment that should have mattered, the moment they should have cared, had already passed. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone alone changed the temperature of the room. It was clipped, composed, and full of weight. A silence followed, one that felt heavier than any shouting could have accomplished. Moments later, the gate manager arrived out of breath, clipboard in hand, eyes already calculating damage control. He scanned the scene, TSA officers awkwardly lingering, airline staff stiff and pale, and the couple standing side by side like a wall no one dared cross. "Judge Moore, Congresswoman Walker." "I'm save it," Elijah said flatly. "We're not interested in your introductions. I want a name." The manager blinked. "Excuse me, the name of the person who called security, the one who decided my wife was a threat for asking about her boarding pass." The manager hesitated. "That's a personnel matter." Elijah stepped closer, just enough to make his presence undeniable. "So is discrimination." His voice didn't rise, but the effect was seismic. The manager looked between Naomi and Elijah, visibly shifting his weight. I understand this is a serious concern. We're reviewing no... You're not, Elijah interrupted. You're scrambling. The TSA officers who had once stood with arms crossed were now quiet shadows in the background. The young agent who had dismissed Naomi earlier had disappeared, vanished somewhere down the terminal, hiding from the truth he helped create. Naomi hadn't spoken in several minutes. Her silence now was deliberate. It wasn't passive, it was a form of resistance. She watched them squirm, and she didn't help them soften the blow. Elijah spoke again, slow and surgical. You allowed your staff to escalate a peaceful situation into a security incident. You ignored federal credentials. You detained a sitting Congresswoman, obstructed her travel, and created a public spectacle all because someone didn't like being questioned. The gate manager swallowed visibly. I'll speak with my regional supervisor. You'll do more than that, Elijah said firmly. I promise you. At that moment, Naomi Walker finally spoke clear, direct. Don't launch an investigation because he's here, she said, nodding toward her husband. You should have launched it the moment I was pulled. And the room froze. For a full second, the world inside that gate stopped. Overhead, the intercom casually called for boarding at another gate, another crowd, another flight. But here, right here, everything was still. Elijah glanced down at his watch. You've cost her a funeral. That can't be undone. He looked back up, eyes unwavering. But you will issue a public apology, not just to her, but to everyone you've done this to and never thought twice about. The gate manager opened his mouth but stopped himself. Naomi met his gaze and added one final blow. And no, she said, you don't get to reframe this. Don't spin it like there was confusion. This was judgment, plain and loud. By now, more passengers had gathered nearby. A man in a baseball cap stood off to the side, arms folded. A middle-aged woman whispered something to her husband and pointed toward Naomi and Elijah. A young traveler sat cross-legged near a charging station, typing furiously on their phone. The story was already leaving the terminal. Naomi adjusted the strap on her shoulder and turned to Elijah. Let's go. You sure he asked? Yeah, she said. There's nothing left here for them to explain. They walked toward the exit. No security escort. No apologies trailing behind them. No last-minute vouchers or upgrades. Just silence. And behind them, a heavy wave of regret none of the staff had expected to feel that morning. But what came next outside those walls would be even louder than anything said inside them. By the time Naomi Walker and Elijah Moore reached the parking lot, her phone was already buzzing missed calls, unread texts, notifications lighting up the screen. She ignored them all. Her fingers curled around the handle of her suitcase, but she wasn't moving toward the car just yet. She needed air, not just oxygen. Space to cool the quiet fire still crawling up her chest. Elijah stood beside her, calm as ever, leaning casually against the car, eyes fixed on the terminal doors as if they still owed him an answer. They didn't expect me to show up, he said, voice low. They didn't expect anyone to care. Naomi replied. He turned slightly, looking at her. You okay? She nodded, but it was the kind of nod that didn't mean yes. It meant I will be, just not yet. Inside the terminal, the ripple had already begun. Videos were online. One showed Naomi being led out of the gate area head high, arms by her sides, surrounded by officers who wouldn't meet her gaze. Another clip captured Elijah standing his ground, demanding answers, demanding names. The footage was spreading faster than any press release could hope to catch. In a break room at the back of the Southwest office, the young gate agent Travis sat slumped in a chair. Name tag askew, hands clasped together, staring at the floor like it could erase what he'd done. The gate manager stood nearby, arms folded tightly. "You could have just moved her to a new seat," the manager said, voice low. "That's all she asked." "I didn't know who she was," Travis muttered. "You don't get to treat people like that," the manager said firmly. "Whether you know them or not, I thought she was being difficult." "She asked a question." The manager replied, "That's not a crime." Travis didn't answer. He didn't need to. The weight of it was already settling on him. Not just the fact that he'd messed up, but that everyone had seen it. That the face he dismissed with a smirk belonged to someone who had earned her power without ever raising her voice. And now, every misstep, every word, was being watched, examined by people who knew that look, who had felt that dismissal before. Outside, Elijah leaned on the back of their car while Naomi stood at the trunk, finally scrolling through her messages. One was from a staffer in D.C., a journalist already reached out, wants a statement. Another, from her aunt in Jackson. "He would have been proud of you, Naomi. Don't let them make you small." Naomi took a long breath. "They'll try to spin this," she said. "They can try," Elijah replied. "But it's already public. I just wanted to go to a funeral." "I know." A pause passed between them, heavy with everything she didn't say. Then she looked up at him. "Did I handle it right?" Elijah tilted his head slightly, choosing his words carefully. "You didn't give them what they wanted," he said. "That's more than most people could have done. Because it wasn't just about being right. It was about being seen. About being human and watching that humanity be ignored." Inside the airline's offices, the regional supervisor had arrived. Statements were being taken. Damage control teams had started crafting apology drafts, carefully worded to sound remorseful, but not too accountable. The usual corporate line, "We regret the incident," without ever naming what the incident was. But something about this one wasn't going away. Because this time, the public saw themselves in her. They saw their mothers, their sisters, their wives, their daughters, themselves. They recognized the tone, the way she was spoken to, the dismissal, the quiet judgment, that cold, practiced look that said, "You don't belong here even when everything in your hand says you do." And they were angry. The apologies came first quietly, internally, then on social media. The airline issued a brief, polished statement just hours later. "We regret the incident involving Congresswoman Naomi Walker and are reviewing our procedures to ensure every customer is treated with respect and professionalism." No names, no direct responsibility, just carefully constructed words, designed to deflect more than to address. But it didn't matter. Because by then, the story had already left the terminal. And it wasn't just Naomi Walker's story anymore. Because respect shouldn't be conditional, and dignity doesn't require a title. This wasn't just about one woman being pulled from a flight. It was about what so many people had felt but had never seen reflected back to them, publicly and without apology. Later that evening, Naomi sat on the edge of a hotel bed in Jackson. The room was quiet. A tray of untouched room service sat beside her. Elijah Moore was downstairs making a few calls. The memorial had already ended. Her family had sent photos. They tried not to sound disappointed, but she could feel it anyway in the quiet between their words. In the pause after "We missed you," she scrolled through the headlines. Congresswoman Walker removed from flight after dispute. At Gate Airline and TSA under fire after detaining elected official without cause. Passenger footage sparks public outcry. Naomi didn't want to read them. She had lived it. She didn't need anyone else's version of what she had already endured. But what stopped her cold, what caught in her chest, were the comments. Not just the outrage, but the recognition. Strangers, hundreds of them filling the comment section with their own stories. Teachers, nurses, veterans, elderly travelers, everyday passengers. All of them describing moments they had been pulled aside, questioned, dismissed, talked down to, for existing in the wrong line, for asking the wrong question, for looking like someone who didn't belong. A woman from Arizona wrote, "I didn't have a title, so they talked to me like I was nothing. I didn't argue. I just cried in the bathroom." A man from Oakland shared, "The way they handled her is the way they treated my father. He missed his heart surgery. No one ever said sorry." It went on and on. Each comment, another echo, another wound reopened. Another person remembering the moment they were made to feel invisible. Naomi felt something shift in her chest, a tightening, a burning, because this wasn't just about what happened at Gate 22B. It was about something older, deeper, wider, something that had happened too many times to too many people, just not always in front of a camera. And suddenly, she realized her silence in that hallway hadn't been passive. It had been a mirror. A few minutes later, Elijah Moore returned to the hotel room and set his phone down on the desk. "You're everywhere," he said quietly. "I know," Naomi Walker replied, her voice low. He looked at her for a long moment. "You want to talk about it?" She shook her head. "Not yet." He sat beside her without pressing further. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was understood. Heavy, but familiar. "You did the right thing," he said gently, even when they didn't. Naomi turned her gaze toward the window. Outside, Jackson moved slowly. Streetlights hummed. Cars passed by in soft, distant intervals. "They treated me like I was invisible," she said after a pause, "like I didn't belong, even when I showed them exactly who I was." Elijah nodded slowly. "You think they'll learn from it?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she said, "but maybe someone else will. Because that's what moments like these do. They linger. They echo. Not always for the people who cause them, but for the people who live through them, and for the ones watching, remembering, realizing, this has happened to me, too. A few days later, Naomi returned to Washington, D.C. She turned down every morning show interview. She didn't want to be a trending headline. She didn't want her face plastered across a story curated for clicks. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted a conversation, not a spectacle. So instead of a soundbite, she wrote a letter. It was published in several major newspapers across the country. And in it, she wrote, "This isn't just about one gate or one airline. It's about how quickly some people in power forget the basic rules of human decency. About how easily someone's voice can be dismissed when it doesn't come wrapped in privilege or pedigree. And it's about how dignity is not something that should be given based on recognition. It should be automatic. Every single time." That last line was the one people remembered most. The airline eventually issued a longer apology. This time, they named her. This time, they acknowledged it had been mishandled. But by then, it didn't matter. Because the public had already written their own version of the story. And in that version, Naomi Walker wasn't just a congresswoman. She was every person who had ever been overlooked, silenced, dismissed, talked down to, treated like their presence was inconvenient, and the most powerful part. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten, she didn't storm out. She stood still and let the world see what it really looks like when someone who deserves better is treated like they don't matter. But the final message, it wasn't hers alone. It belonged to every person who had ever waited quietly, patiently, for someone to speak up when no one else did. 1 week later, Naomi Walker sat alone on a bench outside Union Station in Washington, D.C. She had just finished a private meeting with a group of young interns working on civil rights policy. They didn't ask her about committee work or legislative deadlines. They didn't bring up bills or headlines. They asked about the airport. One of them, a 19-year-old from Kansas named Imani, sat quietly for a moment before finally speaking. "I saw the video," she said. "I've been treated like that before. I didn't know what to say when it happened. You didn't say much either, but you made it loud." Naomi didn't say anything right away, but that stayed with her. Because sometimes, a moment doesn't need volume. It needs stillness. Stillness that becomes a mirror. Stillness that forces the world to pause, to look at itself. She thought back to the look on that gate agent's face when Elijah asked for his name, the silence that followed, the slow realization that he hadn't just dismissed a passenger, he had revealed something deeper. He hadn't just failed to recognize a title. He had exposed a truth he wasn't ready to confront. And Naomi remembered what Elijah told her the night they returned home to Fort Worth. "Most people think power comes with a badge or a desk," he said. "But real power is when you know who you are, and no one can take that from you. Not even when they try." That had been the lesson all along. Not just for the airline, not just for the staff who scrambled to apologize after the damage was done, but for everyone who saw themselves in that hallway. Because the truth is, this wasn't rare. This wasn't unique. This wasn't the first time it had happened. This was just the time it was caught on camera. This was the version where someone had a platform, a name, a title too loud to dismiss. But what about the woman heading to her daughter's graduation? What about the man flying across the country for a job interview? The grandmother returning home to bury her brother? What happens when they get dismissed? Elijah had been right. It should never take a title for someone to be treated with basic human decency. Naomi leaned back on the bench and watched people move past her, coffee cups in hand, headphones on, briefcases swinging, heads down, everyone trying to get somewhere. Everyone just hoping the world wouldn't stop them for simply existing. Part 10. Let this be the mirror, sitting on that bench outside Union Station. Naomi Walker picked up her phone and drafted one final message to her staff. It wasn't long, but it was intentional. Next town hall, we open with a story, not about politics, about people, about what happened at Gate 22B, because stories matter, not for the drama, not for the headlines, but because they hold up a mirror and ask the questions we so often avoid. If that had been me, what would I have done? Or more importantly, if I had been the one in power, how would I have treated her? This was never about shaming. It was about awareness, about the truth that dignity is not a reward, it is a right. So, to anyone who has ever been talked down to, brushed aside, labeled difficult for simply standing their ground, to anyone who has ever had to prove they belong in a space they already paid to be in, to anyone who has swallowed their words out of fear, their tone might be weaponized against them. Your story matters, and one day, someone will speak it whether or not a camera is watching. So the next time you're behind a desk, or standing in line, or holding a clipboard, look someone in the eye. Listen. Don't assume. Because how we treat people when no one is watching reveals who we really are when everyone is. And if this story stirred something in you, anger, empathy, recognition, then share it. Don't let it fade into the background. Let it be a reminder. And if you want more real stories like this, stories that reflect, reveal, and remind us what respect truly looks like, then subscribe. Because the truth deserves to be heard. And so do the people living it.